students like we would be, this is their foggiest area. This is an area where they tend to get lost. This is Nehemiah, Ezra, those books. And that's probably one of the fuzziest areas for people. It takes place in 3 waves. The first, Zerubbabel, he was a prince descending from David. He led 42,500 people back to Jerusalem in 538. And they laid the foundation of the temple. The work was opposed by surrounding heathen nations, and the work stopped for many years. Haggai and Zechariah were sent to stir up the people to rebuild, and the work was resumed. When the work was resumed, in 4 years, the temple was finished in 517 BC. So once they got with it, it really went together. The lessons of Haggai and so on are very important. You know, when we think in terms, one time I was talking with our people, and I was here, and I said that I'm afraid that we may be on the verge of the book of Haggai. And people wrestled with that. I didn't go much beyond that. But actually, we'd come to the place where we were kind of tolerating around the building and that which we'd never tolerated in our homes. You know, everybody was being very careful to do their remodeling and whatnot, and we were just kind of letting things drift here. And thankfully people got with it and we began to move forward. But Haggai and Zechariah were sent to stir up the people. In 4 years they finished the temple. The next wave, so the first wave is Zerubbabel, and he comes and basically begins the building of the temple. Ezra, in 458 BC, led a company to reinforce the earlier band. Found things in sad shape: opposition of the poor, neglect of the law, intermarriage with the heathen nations, and Ezra led very, very strong reforms. The third wave was led by Nehemiah, and in 445 BC he secured permission from the king to go and rebuild the walls, which had been in ruins since the fall of Jerusalem. And he led with vigor and with courage, and in 52 days the walls were completed. That brings us to between the Testaments. The Old Testament closes 400 BC, and then what follows is called the 400 silent years. The reason they call it 400 silent years is because there was no scripture written during that time. It was anything but silent so far as history is concerned. There was constant battles, and Israel, it was kind of interesting because you had the nations in the north and you had the nations in the south, Babylon and so on up here, and then Egypt and everything down here. And Israel was the bridge between these two places, and so the armies kept marching across and causing all kinds of problems. And that brings us, but anyway, the Old Testament closes in 400 BC, and that brings us to the 11th period. Now this one we tend again to be a little bit more familiar with, and this is Life of Christ. 4 longer books, but for the most part, they only cover what kind of a span of time? 3 years. We have 4 books covering the span basically of 3 years. Each gospel comes from a different perspective. The book of Matthew is kind of like an oil portrait of the Messiah. Luke is kind of a historical documentary type of thing. Mark is kind of just a quick documentation here and there. And then John is kind of like an x-ray. and really looks into the depth of who the Lord was, although all of them are dealing with that. That brings us to the third, and we're really usually quite familiar with that one, although sometime we're approaching Christmas now. And look and see how much of our Christmas carols and cards and whatnot are really inaccurate so far as Scripture is concerned. One of my life ambitions, which I'll probably never do, I have two. One's comical or senseless, and that's to get goats re-entered into the nativity scene. A lot more likely there are goats there than cows and this sort of thing. So, anyway, but that one's, I'll probably never get to that. The other is to write a Christmas pageant that's scripturally accurate. That would be a challenge. And it's interesting because I gave a test one time we had a group that Shirley and I led for a number of years, M&Ms, the more matures. Now I are one. Shirley got after me yesterday because I was writing a letter to the city of Seattle. And I said, I'm 80 years old and my son sold this for me. And she said, you're playing on this. Then I found out I didn't have to do that. I just had to fill out a form. That's what happens when you're 80. So the last period is the period of missions. And this actually, the book of Acts fits into this period. Paul's letters, Hebrews and the general epistles, the book of Revelation, all of this goes into that. And the New Testament closes about 100 AD. So again, we have to keep time perspective. From Pentecost to the writing of 1 Corinthians was over 20 years. From Pentecost to the close of New Testament covers almost 70 years. And then the New Testament closes. So these kind of help you to think through the periods. Now, every Bible fact that you can think of, every event, every person, every situation goes into one of these periods. And so if you keep this, now this is something that really you should go through about every 6 months, preferably as you teach it to somebody. You know, somebody that needs to learn something about the Scriptures or wants to get a little bit deeper into it. But this is something that you need to review over and over and over and over and over again. Some of you have been through it several times with me. As I mentioned, when I was preaching at Little Brown Chapel, between my retirement and picking up here, kind of dug in. I was out there for 3 years. And they actually asked me to do that. I did this as a message, and they asked if I'd repeat it within a month, just because it opened up so much for them. Questions, comments?
You didn't touch on Esther.
Pardon?
You didn't say anything about Esther.
About Exodus?
Esther, the lady, the queen.
Esther. Esther, okay. Where would Esther go?
Restoration.
Pardon?
Restoration. I'm guessing because that's where it's in on your sheet.
She going in the time of restoration. It was right around that time where they were allowing the people to go back. And Esther's uncle and that, had they wanted to, they could have been in on that first wave going back to the land of Israel to rebuild. Okay, the sheet that you have, I guess we should comment on that one. The sheet that you have there, I gave you so you could run through the periods, but also into these periods goes every Bible book. And basically, we did that for you in the sheet that you picked up as a handout. We have the Genesis, Job, Psalms. Job is one of the oldest books of that were written, one of the oldest books of the Old Testament. And then into the period of Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Conquest, Joshua, and so on. And then the 6, so far as you're sorting Bible books and periods, period 6 again will be the most complicated. The kingdom and the divine